So, guys, ESPN just put out their bold and I would say humiliating prediction for the Chiefs' 2026 season. They said that the Kansas City Chiefs are going to miss the playoffs again this year. Not a step back, not a struggle, straight up out of the playoff picture. And he didn't stop there either. He went and said a division rival's roster is clearly better than ours right now. I've got some thoughts on that, and I don't think they line up with what actually happened this offseason. What's up, Chiefs' Kingdom? Welcome to NFL Playbook Chiefs. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. So let me actually break down what ESPN said, because it's not just a throwaway line, they actually built out a whole argument for it. The basic point was that we didn't do enough this offseason to crack the top 7 in the AFC that were still in some kind of rebuilding phase, and that teams like the Broncos and Chargers are just flat out better than us right now. And honestly, I sat there reading it thinking, did they watch the same season I watched? So I am starting with the run game, because that's where I think this whole argument falls apart first. Last year, we were rough running the football. Like genuinely one of the worst rushing attacks in the league as far as creating explosive plays. Our backs combined for like 3 runs over 20 yards the entire season. 3. Kenneth Walker had multiple 20-yard runs in the Super Bowl by himself. So when Seattle let him hit the market, and we went and got him, that's not some minor roster tweak, guys. That's addressing the single biggest hole in this offense. Because think about what that means for Patrick Mahomes. Last year, he basically had to be the run game himself, scrambling, extending plays, doing everything on his own because there was no threat behind him. And when a defense doesn't respect your backfield at all, they just sit back and dare your quarterback to beat them deep every single snap. That's exhausting, and honestly, I think that's part of why things look so disconnected at times last season. Now you've got a guy who can rip off a 20-yard gain on any given play, and that changes how a defense has to approach us completely. I mean, think about it from a defensive coordinator's chair for a second. Last year, you could stack the box a little less aggressively against us because you knew our backs weren't going to hurt you on their own. This year, you can't do that anymore. Every single defensive game plan against us now has to account for a guy who scored the MVP in the biggest game of the year. That changes coverages, it changes blitz packages, it opens up space underneath for Mahomes that just wasn't there before. And it's not just the backfield, right? The defense got real attention too. We went out and added Khyiris Tonga, Peter Woods, R. Mason Thomas, and Mansour Delane all in one offseason. That's 4 guys who I think can be difference makers, not just depth pieces. Peter Woods and Khyiris Tonga up front, that's exactly what you need to free up your pass rushers, because last year we were blitzing at one of the highest rates in the league and still not getting home enough. When you upgrade the bodies up front like that, your edge rushers get cleaner lanes, and that's where R. Mason Thomas comes in. This dude was putting up SEC-level pass rush numbers that people weren't talking about enough, and now he's replacing Charles Omenihu off the edge. I think that's a real upgrade, not a lateral move. Now, the secondary, and I'll be honest with you, we lost some name value there. We moved on from Trent McDuffie and Jalen Watson, and I get why on paper that looks scary if you're just looking at who left. But you can't just look at who walked out the door, you gotta look at what we did after that. Noah Williams already flashed as a legit starter as a rookie last year. Then you draft Mansour Delane, a guy a lot of people had as QB1 for cornerbacks in this class. That's not a downgrade, guys. That's building a young core that I think can actually be better a year or 2 from now than what we had. On top of that, we added Jadon Kennedy on day 2, another corner who was seriously productive in college, so this isn't just one big swing, it's depth stacked on top of talent. And then at safety, we went and got Alohi Gilman off the Ravens on a real contract, 3 years, almost $25 million, with 15 guaranteed. This isn't a camp body. This is a guy who stepped into a playoff-caliber defense last year and immediately produced pass breakups, tackles, forced turnovers, the whole package. Then we added Kader Kohou for extra depth on top of that. So when you actually add it all up, cornerback and safety together, I think this might end up being one of the more improved units on the entire roster by the time September rolls around. So when ESPN says we didn't improve enough, I honestly don't know what more they wanted us to do. We addressed the run game, we addressed the pass rush, we addressed the secondary. That's basically every major weakness from last season in one offseason, and not with cheap fixes either, with real investment. Now let's get into this AFC West comparison, because this is the part that really got under my skin. They said the Broncos roster is clearly better than ours. Clearly. Not arguably, not maybe, clearly. Okay, so let's actually look at how those games went last season, because we did go 1-5 in the division. I'm not going to pretend that didn't happen. But every single one of those losses was a 1-score game. Average margin of less than 5 points across all 4. And the game we won against the Raiders, score was 31-0. So, this wasn't a division where we got run off the field, this was a division where every single game came down to the final possession. And on top of that, Patrick Mahomes wasn't even playing in the Week 17 loss to Denver. He missed that game entirely. And in the loss to the Chargers, he wasn't even on the field for the final drive of a 3-point game. You take him out of both of those games basically at the most critical moments, and we still only lose by a combined margin that you could count on 2 hands. And then think about the Christmas Eve game against Denver, the one where ESPN says their roster is clearly better than ours. We were banged up in that game, missing multiple starters including our top 2 cornerbacks, and Denver still needed a touchdown drive in the final 2 minutes to survive us. That's a team they're calling clearly superior, needing a miracle finish against a Chiefs team playing without half its defensive backfield and without its starting quarterback for most of that season stretch. I just don't see how you look at 4 one-score losses, 3 of them without your franchise quarterback playing meaningful snaps, and conclude the other roster is clearly better. To me, that says the margin was razor thin, and now we've got a healthier, deeper roster heading into this season. And honestly, the Broncos didn't exactly go out and reload either. Their big move was trading for a receiver who I'd argue is one of the more overrated names available this offseason. That's supposed to be the difference maker that puts them clearly ahead of us? I don't see it. And then there's the Mahomes piece of the argument, and honestly, this is where I think ESPN is the most behind on the actual news. The point being made is that every game Patrick Mahomes misses in September is a game we could fall behind in the standings. Sure, technically true, but it's acting like there's still real uncertainty here. Every single update we've gotten since the spring has been positive. He's been running, he's been throwing full speed since March, and by all accounts, he is on track to be out there in week 1 with no restrictions at all. This isn't a guy limping into training camp hoping to be ready. This is a guy who's been ahead of schedule basically the entire recovery, and that's exactly why Justin Fields' move makes so much sense to me. We gave up next to nothing for him, a late-round pick, to bring in a guy who has actually started and won real NFL games before. I don't care how his stat line looked in New York last year. That whole situation was a mess that had nothing to do with him individually. What matters is, if Mahomes isn't fully cleared by week 1, we're not scrambling to throw an inexperienced arm out there. We've got a guy who can run the offense and keep defenses honest with his legs too. So this idea that we're going to be down our starting quarterback for a chunk of September, I just don't see the evidence for that anywhere, and even if we were, we're covered. So when I put it all together, better run game, better pass rush, a young, talented secondary that got deeper at 2 spots, a razor-thin margin against the division that's supposedly clearly better than us, and a quarterback who looks like he's going to be full go in week 1 with a proven backup behind him, I really don't see the case for us missing the playoffs. If anything, I think this team is deeper and more balanced than it's been in years. And it's funny because this isn't the only place I've seen us get shortchanged this offseason. ESPN also came out with their offseason grades for every team, and ours landed way lower than I think it should have. Even though in that same breakdown they admitted we made one of the best trades of the entire offseason. And when you actually connect what they were looking at there with what we just talked about, it's the same story all over again. They pointed at the cornerback room like it was a weakness because we moved on from 2 established starters. But they're ignoring that we turned one of those guys into multiple future picks and used that capital to go get a guy considered the top corner in his draft class. They flagged the running back spot too, even while admitting Kenneth Walker was one of the better additions in the league this offseason. And they barely even mentioned that we kept Travis Kelce in the building on a 1-year deal, a guy who still led this entire team in targets, catches, yards, and touchdowns last season even with everything else going wrong around him. That chemistry with Mahomes doesn't just show up overnight somewhere else, and bringing him back for one more run matters way more than people want to get a credit for. So at the end of the day, I look at this roster and I see a team that fixed its run game, added real difference makers on both levels of the defense, ensured itself at the most important position on the field, and is getting its franchise quarterback back on track for week 1. That doesn't sound like a team on the outside looking in come playoff time to me. That sounds like a team that's about to prove a whole lot of people wrong this season, and honestly, I can't wait to watch it happen.